I commend the selflessness of this group, as selfless of a group as you could ask for. I think that it's nice to have that balance where on third down, the defense really doesn't know where the ball's going. We're going to look for the best players we can get. It doesn't mean we didn't have a true number one, so we don't want that. No, we still want good players. We'll always want it to be as selfless of a group as as possible.
What's good, folks? Welcome to another edition of the Cover One Film Room, the show that gives you the hows and the whys behind both the good and the bad of the Buffalo Bills. I am one of your two hosts, Anthony Prohaska, joined as always by Eric Turner. And Eric, it's Combine Week.
Yes.
We got some fun stuff to look forward to at the back end of the week. We got some fun nuggets from Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott at their Combine pressers earlier this week. We have a Khalil Shakir contract extension, all of that within the larger picture coming up in the next couple of weeks of free agency starting and then kicking into draft mode. There was a lot of things happening this week in particular, a lot for us happening here in the film room, in particular this episode where we start to focus on evaluating the Bills' offensive improvement and several free agent targets for ourselves like we did last week in the defensive episode. But before we get to that, how you doing? How you feeling? How's it going?
Great, man. This is it's going to be a action-packed episode. We have news, as you said. We have film of targets for the Bills on offense. Issues. There's only a few issues that we saw on offense and how the Bills offense could improve and how some of these draft targets and free agent targets, and more importantly, may help the Bills offense. And so it's going to be an in-depth episode as it typically is. But as you said, man, big news kicked off yesterday with the extension of one of the Bills, better players over the last couple of years, and really who I think we coined it during the year. He was kind of the offensive engine for the Bills this past year when it came to keeping the offense on track, extension of the run game stuff, getting them out of pressure looks and being the outlet for the pressure looks. And that is, again, the extension of Khalil Shakir. Congrats to him. Really nice contract, but also kudos to Brandon Beane for locking him up at the price he did.
Yeah, 4 years, $60 million, I believe $32 million guaranteed. Honestly, the average annual value came under for a lot, based on people's different projections. I know Greg had mentioned something about that as well. And the conversation pieces, just what value he provided this past season, the engine, the easy button, an answer in a multitude of fashions, just someone who Allen could spit the ball out to and he could create his own work, the ability to take advantage of blocks and just pinball around and win with some physicality and some contact balance, but some athleticism and some speed and some juice. Just a really nice moment for him. And obviously a huge moment for this offense and Beane, like to hit again. They continue to just hit on these later round type of guys, and Shakir, that 5th round pick, when it happened, it was one of those kind of like, man, how come this guy fell? He was pegged as a day 2 or very early day 3 type of guy, and he fell. And then, just his rookie year kind of getting eased in a little bit, but now he's become a central point of this Bills offense. And the yards after catch this past year, EPA, all these different metrics, however you want to look at it, he had a crazy good year and he got handsomely rewarded, but also, a good market value standpoint for the Bills as well.
He's been fun to watch develop, especially, for guys like us that watch a lot of film and pay attention to details like you mentioned and things he adds to the offense. And, coming in, he paid his dues, just kept his head down and just did his job and continues to do that according to the staff. And it's been nice to see him evolve and add that blocking element as well. He's always been willing, but for him to be on the edge of the formation and insert into a C or D gap or the edge of the offensive formation on duo runs so that James Cook could bounce it, he was always willing to do that, but his technique has gotten so much better. His timing and patience on when to create that contact in the block has just developed so well for this offense. And Last year he was in the slot 72% of the time, up over 70%. With this extension and commitment to him, I wonder if they start to expand his role as not just a slot guy, but again, in those two wide receiver formations, you're going to see him on the boundaries a little more, running your traditional routes that are outside the numbers, things along the boundary, things like that, where, the offense maybe evolves a little more, whether it's because they're using more two tight end sets, whether it's because the different weapons they add. I just wonder if they start to not just focus him and align him in the slot, but more so in other areas to expand his game. But also, again, we always talk about it, maximizing your player, maximizing Shakir as a wide receiver and not just as a slot option.
We talked about that briefly last year in terms of being kind of like how they viewed Shakir inside, outside, and how would that kind of influence the type of receivers they went after, either in free agency, but more so the draft. And we tied it back to all the work we did with his Boise State tape, where he showed he could work outside a little bit and into the boundary a little bit. And I was like, okay, like, do they try to lean him in that direction? Do they keep him as the slot only? Do they try to mix and match and use him all over the place? I really like, that question that you pose there, because it's now a guy that you've paid well, who, especially in the light of Diggs kind of going away, right? And then you've got Keon Coleman, which there are some questions about, who we're going to talk about in a second. You've got some questions a bit around Dalton Kincaid. The running game is really good, but then there's questions maybe for James Cook in terms of like if he returns and at what cost and what price. All of these pieces, your offensive line is set, no jinx. You've got Josh Allen, and now you've got Khalil Shakir. And so I think that's a really interesting question in terms of what does the focus look like for him? Is it more of the same and we just keep spamming, if it's not broke, don't fix it? Or do they start to, add some wrinkles or some layers and really try and round him out or maximize what he brings to the table and then the impact that has on the offense? And, someone who I just mentioned, who we want to talk about now, Keon Coleman, has come under, I don't want to say fire, but I feel like I've been in and out on social media a lot over the past couple of weeks, and I've just seen some random, hey, Keon's going to be fine. And then a lot of like, what a horrible pick. This was a bust. And, they should have taken Worthy, or they should have taken this guy. And Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott both spoke about him at the combine, and he's become a bit of a focal point, I think, for the fan base these past couple of weeks.
It's so interesting, man. Maybe it's just this time of year because, overall, we'll talk about his usage and his stats, his production or lack thereof. But it was interesting that during the press conferences for Beane and McDermott, they were directly asked about Coleman, and they were asked about Coleman at the end of the year pressers as well. So they're kind of led into this conversation, and this narrative again was created in many ways, but there's some validity to it, obviously, and especially when you're talking end of the year exit interviews. There's obviously some criticism that happens, in positive, constructive criticism, and it sounded like that happened between McDermott, Beane, and Coleman. And so I brought up this clip from McDermott's presser the other day. Beane did mention him as well, but he was kind of like, if there's a good cop, bad cop, Beane was the good cop, and McDermott was the bad cop, because just listen to what McDermott said here. It was very honest. It was very direct, very calculated. Listen to how he says it and where his eyes are when he's saying these things, because it all matters. But again, in the end, this was honest and it was calculated. And I do believe he said these same things to Coleman at his exit interview. So listen to this clip from Sean McDermott at the combine.
An up and down first season. I thought he got off to a start that he built momentum through, and then he got injured, and then from there on it was rather rocky, I would say. He's a good young man, as most young players don't always know what they don't know about the league and how hard this league is. It's more constructive style conversation and topics with how we can move forward together. Until you've gone through it, you haven't gone through it. And so just trying to build awareness. You have to stay urgent. You have to stay on the gas, or this league will eat you up, whether you're a player, a coach, whatever it is. And that takes a certain type of person with a certain drive and determination and fire in their heart. And it's going to be Keon's turn to show that he has that this offseason. As far as
I love the part where he's looking down. And he's like, he's a good young man. You could just tell he's like, he's researching in his brain, like how to say this very softly but bluntly. He was sending a message as he typically does in some of these, this time of the year in these pressers. I think he was sending a message. And to me, it was interesting to just to hear his words, but I don't think it was necessarily the lack of production. If you're looking at the splits from the beginning to end of the year, there were some things obviously Coleman could have done better, but it must have been something off the field and how he handled the injury and maybe what it takes to play injured and still have that mental toughness. He's a young dude. He's like, what, 21? So, I mean, that is in his favor. He's like McDermott said, he doesn't know what it takes in this league, especially when it comes to playing injured, when it comes to taking care of your body and all those things. So as much as like a lot of people are focused on, and this is where a lot of the hate on social media is kind of geared towards Coleman and Worthy. And then even Ladd, that whole conversation came up on social too. I think that's where a lot of people think it's for the lack of production. But to me, that sounded more like McDermott had issues with the mental stuff, the mental toughness, the ability or lack thereof to play injured, and some of the stuff off the field, not necessarily the lack of production on the field.
I completely agree. The big ones for me in obviously watching the clip now and then watching the presser as we prepared for the episode the past couple of days, him saying that, and you don't know what you don't know, and this league will eat you up, and then talking about the fire and everything. That all struck me more as like not on the field things, and I was like, like those are, especially for a coach who, and an organization, but especially McDermott, he's very selective with what he says and how he says it. And that didn't seem like generic coach speak that kind of applies all the time. Like he doesn't throw that around a lot. And then especially juxtaposing that with what Beane said, which was more similar, kind of talking about him, he was trending up and then he got the unfortunate hit on his wrist, probably didn't reach the peak he was at pre-injury, but then, he's 21 years old. Let's give him a chance. Let's not beat him up. He made
Focus
some big plays.
Good.
Yes. But, there's also some things he needs to do better, but he also made some plays, this and that. So 1,000%, him being more the good cop, but McDermott, that phrasing definitely struck me a little bit. And then mentioning, kind of the work. Beane also mentioned some things like that too. He's going to go this off season and he's going to grind and he's going to put the work in. That's the type of kid that he is. And it was, some of that felt generic coach speaky from Beane, but McDermott seemed more poignant and more specific. Like there was a reason. And then to your point, again, maybe we're just reading too much in the body language of the tea leaves, but it almost seemed, when he was looking down, like he was trying to find the right words because he had something specific in his mind, but he needed to figure out how to articulate it to make it not sound too terrible.
Yeah, there's no doubt. It was so obvious. It was so obvious that the way he was portraying Keon and the way Keon comes across sometimes is young, inexperienced. I don't want to say immature. I think saying immature is, I don't know the guy, so I don't want to call him immature.
Aloof.
But
I would say aloof.
He's very loose. He's very laid back. He's got a great personality.
Yeah.
And the Bills want that. Obviously, they like that type of guy on their roster and they embrace that. But you could tell he was trying to just like recollect or use words that wouldn't be spun on him because he knows this is a big conversation given how the end of the year happened. So I want to take a look at and talk about the stuff that happened on the field. So I thought in the first half of the year, as some of the stats, I bring them up here, courtesy of True Media. In weeks 1 through 9, if you look at the splits between weeks 1 through 9, and then he returned after that injury, weeks 15 plus, there's quite a difference in a few different areas. And so I want to look at some of these stats and let's start off with just the average depth of target. The average depth of target in the first 9 weeks was 13 yards for Keon Coleman. In weeks 15 plus, it was 20.1. In the EPA per target, this is a massive difference.
Yeah.
First half of the year, 0.51. Second half of the year, 0.04. 0.51 EPA per target among wide receivers in that first 9 weeks was like 15th overall. Like that's very, very good. 1.9 yards per route run in the first half, 1.35 in the second. And then this is another big one, yards after catch per reception, was 8.7 in the first half, 3.4 on the back end. So again, when you look at the average depth of target, when you look at some of the yak stuff, what they were doing, remember they threw some screens to him. He was doing some stuff underneath on some crossing routes in the first half of the year. The opportunities in the second half of the year after his injury, they weren't as, the quality was just way down. And I felt some of that was he was playing at the end of the year, the regular season, with Mitch and some of the backups, and they're literally double moving him in that Patriots game. And even I think in the Jets game too, where they're just throwing it deep and just chucking it down. So obviously that's going to hurt his numbers. But I thought that from his perspective, he also didn't play with the physicality and above the rim dog nature that he was in the first half. So I think it's a little bit of everything, as is typically the case. But I think overall, Bills fans, we need to chill. I think this guy's going to be fine. I think he's going to be fine. Again, before the injury, he was playing almost as lights out as you can for a rookie wide receiver.
Yeah. And, it's funny too, even like those weeks, the weeks 15 and beyond numbers, 139 receiving yards, 64 of that came on one catch against Detroit, which is just like wild to even kind of put that into perspective further. The conversation around Keon, I'm not annoyed by it, but I find it interesting because he was such a guy that coming out, and we talked about it last year when they drafted him and broke down the tape and spoke on him. I spoke about him and I say this as a person who liked him. I had him as wide receiver 9 in my individual rankings going into the draft. He had such a wide, I still think this, he has such a wide variance of outcomes because of how raw he was and how inexperienced he was and green in a lot of ways. I'm like, the thing that I said going into the draft, and I'm still saying it now, if you told me at the end of his rookie contract, he was a solid wide receiver 2, I could buy it. If you told me he was out of the league, I could buy it. If you told me that he turns into the guy who keeps getting 1-year deals because a bunch of different teams think, oh, we can be the one to finally tap into him and get him right, I could buy that. I thought he had such a wide range on the spectrum of outcomes because of how raw he was. And it felt like a lot of people knew that from the fan base and was, oh, okay, like, but the strength and the size, the athleticism, they just need to polish him up and clean him up a little bit. And now we're sitting here at the end of the rookie year and everybody's like, well, he's not polished. He wasn't going to be. It's 1 year. He went from Michigan State to Florida State. Florida State's offense was not necessarily very pro style and pro ready and pro preparing him for the league. He was a basketball football player at Michigan State. Like all of the things that were spoken about last year that were part of the encouraging things.
Yeah.
I thought very much the kind of where he is now was almost kind of like par for the course. The good news was when it worked, like, and we talked about on the show a bunch, him being able to play above the rim as a rookie, like that was like, okay, if he can hang his hat on that, that'll be a win. And he did. He's out there dunking on dudes and separating at the catch point in a couple of ways. The areas he needs to clean up, we knew that coming in. He still needs to clean those up. That wasn't going to be done by year one. And I think it's unfair comparing him and Worthy are two completely different players. And then you mentioned Ladd McConkey. McConkey was almost like as pro ready as it gets as a route runner and in terms of polish, but his ceiling was a bit more limited. They're all different in terms of their timelines and trajectories. And it feels like now that it didn't necessarily pan out in the way that a lot of people thought, they're angry about it. But it's, and this isn't to give him an excuse or make excuses for him, but it was going to take a couple of years for him to get some of that seasoning and some of that polish. And I feel like the lack of understanding there is a bit interesting and a little frustrating, I should say, for myself, at least from the fan base in that regard. Something else that was frustrating, we talked about this so much under Dorsey and then going into the offseason. And here we are we talked about it in season. And here we are talking about it now, as the graphic shows with MVP Josh Allen, play action. And this being an area of opportunity for this Bills offense, who, when they used it, it was very good. And some of it is tied to the sample size because they didn't use it a ton. Yeah. But it just seems like they left a lot of meat on the bone with how good the run game was and how much they could have potentially leaned into play action to really gouge teams. And yes, before anybody jumps in and say, we don't have to have a good run game to have a good play action game, it does help. And it just felt like this was a missed opportunity for this team in 2024. And it's something we hope to see tweaked in a more favorable usage rate way going into 2025.
Yeah, we're talking about Keon Coleman. We're talking about the Bills' play action game or lack thereof. And it's going to lead into the receiver talk when we're talking free agency here in a few minutes. But if there's one area that they can improve, like you said, it is play action. According to PFF, Josh Allen ran play action 22.7% of the time. That was 29th overall. They had a 0.25 EPA per dropback, which was 10th when they did run play action. Very good. And their success rate was 10th as well at 54%. So it's like, why aren't you guys running play action more with Josh Allen, who is very good at that deception and turning his back to the defense and hiding the ball when he's these run action and play fakes. And then again, like you said, they have a dominant offensive line and running game. It just only makes sense. I don't know why they didn't go to it more often with Josh. And again, it's not just from the quarterback position and throwing it, but if you go ahead and now look at, where the ball was going when they did run play action, that's what's so surprising and kind of is the lead for this show is when the Bills ran play action and only 35.8% of the time that ball was thrown to wide receivers. It was 30th overall. All right. 34.1% of the time, it went to the tight ends. That was 9th overall. So top 10 there. 24.8% of the time, it went to the running backs, 3rd overall there. So if there's one area, as you said, of opportunity to get the ball into the receiver's hands, it's especially off of play action. It's just one area they can help when you're talking about, talking about everyone eats and asked about adding speed to the offense. This is one area, play action, that they can help and improve on for the Bills offense to add another dimension, which is scary because, again, there weren't many issues with this offense, but it's scary. They could add this and they could become that much more explosive.
Yeah, especially for a team that is good at running duo and how you can just run it's such an easy run concept to then mirror from a play action standpoint, and let alone everything else that they do on top of it. And the ability for it to kind of help, not necessarily manufacture, but kind of help generate some more explosive plays, allow you to create some one-on-one matchups on the outside. Granted, you ideally have the players on the outside who could take advantage of those one-on-one matchups, which we're going to talk about in this episode. And yeah, I don't know if it was a, hey, we don't have the horses, so we're not doing it, or if it was just something else. Because I can understand that, right? Depending on the guys you have in the room and what you think. Maybe you think, allocating resources elsewhere from a play calling standpoint or a concept standpoint make more sense. And again, this Bills offense was very, very good in 2024. So this is us nitpicking and picking an area that, again, like you said, it's scary to think about if they got better in this area, what it could mean, because how good of an offense they had. But it really just was very confusing. It just seems like such a natural thing. You hear it as soon as you start watching football as a little kid, like, oh, they're running the ball really well. This is going to open up a lot of opportunities for play action. And you're just thinking like, oh, okay, where's the play action? And you're like, okay, well, maybe like next week. And it just felt like they kept kicking that can and we never really saw it from that usage rate standpoint. And I wonder too, obviously, does that, if it was a bodies thing or a horses thing, how does that impact the type of guys that they go after this offseason? And potentially, how did that influence us in terms of who we targeted in this episode from the offensive side of the ball? Spoiler, it is very wide receiver heavy, as, again, those play action numbers kind of indicate the lack of production there. And just overall, just the qualms and questions that we have at this wide receiver group and that still are present right now.
Yeah. And it's not just the wide receivers improving the passing game and play action. I mean, overall, as has been the talk, I mean, going back to last year's, that vertical stretch, they've done a great job as an offense of horizontally stretching the defense, right? And some of those mesh concepts, you saw the rail off the mesh. They're doing a good job in the screen game as an extension of the passing game. So they definitely stretch defenses horizontally, but they haven't really been able to vertically stretch a defense. More times than not, it was, hey, they're taking an intermediate pass, under 20 yards and taking it down the field for explosive plays. So they do need some big plays from the wide receivers. If you're looking at, overall, the good and the bad of the receiver group, last year they were 10th in EPA per target at 0.29 yards after catch per reception. I mean, you want to talk about an improvement. And when Brady took over for Dorsey, that second half of that year, we expected this. But did I expect them to be number 1 in yards after catch per reception? Absolutely not. But they were last year as a team for the wide receiver group specifically. Now the bad, again, yards per route run, 1.73. That's 20th overall. Success rate, passing success rate from the wide receiver group specifically, they were 17th. And then again, the explosive plays, the big plays, the vertical stretch of the defense, 20-plus yard plays. They only got a 20-plus yard play 32.8% of the time. That was 22nd overall. So when Sal asked Beane about it, yeah, you want to add speed to the offense? Well, yeah, we want to add a vertical stretch, of course. But what did he say about, and how did he frame that next part of his response, Ant?
He said, quote, "We're always looking to add speed, but they got to be football players too. Football is not played on a track. We evaluate the football player first, and then what else they do to bring to the equation."
Yeah, and for us, we're coming into this episode, we're doing all this research, and we're trying to find guys that vertical stretch guys, speed guys, that specific niche that can help in the play action and all this. And then Beane comes and says that, and we're like, oh, he's not wrong, right? Yeah. He's technically not wrong. Yeah. And so again, keep that in mind when we're looking at some of these players. But for me, it's not just about adding a vertical threat to help play action, to help the passing game overall, whether it's drop back or shotgun, under center, any of that. Yes, they need to help, stretch the field vertically to kind of take that cap off the defense. But for me, the Bills saw man coverage 36% of the time last year. There it is. You got to have, going back to last offseason, separators. You got to have man beaters. And while I do think there are a couple mismatch type guys on the roster, I don't think they quite have a guy that is consistently separating in man coverage, especially if we're talking vertically down the field. I think they got the deep overs, those crossers down the field, 15 to 22 yards. But if we're just talking goes, they don't have that guy that can, consistently stretch the field. So I do agree with the fans, the media, when they are talking about, hey, they need to add some speed. They need to add vertical stretcher. But more importantly, they need guys that can beat man coverage because they see it top 5 every single year.
Yeah. And even just from a single high usage rate, they had the most cover 1 played against them last year at 29.5%. And their downfield man coverage answer was really like, hey, Keon, go deep. You're going to have a guy next to you. We're going to chuck it up to you and see if you can catch it on the back shoulder or dunk on someone. And sometimes it worked, but sometimes it doesn't. And also, that's not necessarily a knock on Keon. That's a hard thing to do consistently in the NFL. It's part of what we talked about Keon's game. Winning contested catches consistently in the NFL is a hard thing to do. And so, yeah, it was really, okay, we're going to chuck it up to Keon and hope he can make a play and play above the rim, or we're hoping that Shakir can beat somebody underneath and do something. And if not that, then they were trying to just, okay, we'll do this little rub route here. Does Dawson Knox get to his right landmark so that someone can come open off of that? And just are trying to manufacture it, which again can still work instead of, maybe this is not to mention for some folks, but instead of the previous days with Cole Beasley and Stephon Diggs, where you had these guys where it was like, oh, they're playing man on these guys. Okay, I'm just going to look to one of them because they can beat it. And so I feel like it's Groundhog Day again. So much of this offseason for us and the players we're talking about, but this conversation, like they need juice at that wide receiver spot, the vertical stretch and the push downfield, but also separators. You need guys who can either win with route running or just run away from people. It needs to be more than just scheme and manufactured stuff. You need to have that present in the wide receiver room. And with looking into that for free agency, again, as we did with the defensive side, this is all based on cost and this is all based on fit and need, but looking for those guys to round out the basketball room at wide receiver while also looking for these particular areas in terms of explosivity or guys that are threats down the field or guys that can separate in some form or fashion. That's really kind of the lens that we operated with in this episode.
Yeah, so let's pivot. Let's look at some targets that we believe can help, again, the vertical game, the speed game, the play action game. And so we're going to have a few targets we're going to talk about that are going to help the Bills offense and augment some of their explosivity this coming year. And so the first guy I wanted to start off with, and I picked a couple of Rams, so bear with me. They do a great job of scheming some things up. And so if Joe Brady's going to watch an offense, I would advise him to go watch the Rams offense and how they scheme up and marry their run and pass game when it comes to play action down the field, because the first target I have is Tutu Atwell. Now, he isn't the biggest wide receiver that we're going to look at, but his ability on the outside the numbers, on these play action type plays to create separation, whether it's off or press or it's man versus zone, he does a great job of working outside the numbers, which what we talked about when they drafted Keon. We were hoping to get a little more of that. And also when they traded for Amari Cooper. So his speed is so easy. Guys respect his speed. So you're seeing a lot of off coverage in a lot of these clips because they don't want him to run by them. Now, again, he is smaller, so you got to do some things at the line of scrimmage when it comes to being creative with him. You got to move him around. You can't have him on the line of scrimmage. You don't want him getting pressed. So you see a lot of these plays, he's off. He's in a stacked wide receiver set, but you see him running away from guys left and right. I know he's physically limited, but if we're talking a niche, whether it's off play action or those passes down the field, I think Tutu Atwell could definitely add a very nice niche and role to the Bills offense.
And this is, it's funny too. The first thing I want to lead with for him in doing all like the work on condensed formations and stuff that I did last offseason going into this past season, one of the offenses I watched a ton of was the Rams. And one of the things I noticed was Tutu Atwell for the juice and the speed and the electricity, but how willing of a blocker he is. Like you have to be if you're on the Rams. And I just thought that was like a nice sign of the type of player that he was. Like he's diminutive in stature and size, but he doesn't shy away from like those dirty areas that he needs to in terms of like benefiting other guys as a run blocker. And then as a pass catcher and a receiver, and we're seeing it a bit, like I'm a fan of his just because of the juice and electricity he offers. A bit of a jitterbug. You get him the ball, you let him kind of, or not necessarily get him the ball, but like you give him that space and you let him take advantage of that speed. He can eat up cushion. He knows what success looks like for him, how he finds space. And you're seeing all these corners recognize that speed, how he can use that against them. He's the type of guy, again, not going to be seeing him being this ball winner downfield where he's, winning with catch radius and all that stuff, obviously, but he's got good, short, quick, steps in his feet. It allows him to stay under control. He pairs that with that speed, and how he comes in and out of breaks, I think is at a nice pace as well. I like the type of juice and electricity that he can bring to a wide receiver room.
And if we're talking adding, that explosive element to the offense, he got an explosive play. So play over 20 yards, 54.5% of his receptions last year. Explosive plays per target, 54.5%.
Crazy.
The second highest in the NFL. He
Juice.
finished the season. Juice. 43 receptions for the year, 580 yards, and 13.5 yards per catch. So again, if we're talking that niche, that role, and Beane wanting to add a target to help his offense to round out that wide receiver room before he goes in the draft so he doesn't have to reach, I think Tutu Atwell is a very modest addition, but on the back end could really add the production that you need if you're talking that specific role.
Yeah, and I also think, for the ability to kind of stretch the field vertically and take the top off or win downfield, but then also that ability, if he slams on the brakes, and you saw in several of those clips, especially, against the 49ers early, you get him underneath on a drag route or a little over, and you get him the ball in motion while he's still going, like he can separate quickly horizontally as well. He's the type of guy that can take advantage of the space underneath while also winning downfield or opening space up for other guys. And he has no problem, being that guy who's running the clear out or for the love of the game route to kind of open up things for maybe Dalton Kincaid underneath to kind of work and have more space and things like that. So from a character guy, again, just basing off of what he did on tape in LA as a blocker and then clear out route runner in addition to what he offers as a skill set. And then again, the potential cost. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Tutu Atwell's and a big fan of the other Ram that you will be showing. We have a lot of Rams focus this year. Michael Hoyt last week, 2 Rams this week. Yeah, that's a
good point. Yeah. I mean, they had a great year when you're talking the production they were able to get from young players, but also some of their guys like Tutu Atwell, who didn't come on till late. Demarcus Robinson, he's a guy we're going to talk about later. Like, he's a guy that for the last few years has had really good production and turned out into a really solid receiver after a couple stops in the NFL.
Absolutely. Yeah. He was a guy, Tutu was a guy that people had kind of pegged early on as like, oh, this sleeper. And he didn't really hit. And then, like you said, all of a sudden year 3 and 4, it's like, oh, like, look at this guy becoming an actual focal point. And they've needed him to step up at different points because Puka's missed a bunch of time. Kupp has missed a bunch of time. They've needed him and the other guy that you'll be showing to kind of step up and fill those roles. All right.
And real quick before you go on, the spot track AAV for Tutu Atwell is $4 million. So I don't think he'll get that, but very, very affordable if we're talking rounding out the receiver room, but also augmenting the receiver room when it comes to adding that niche and role for the Bills offense.
Yes, absolutely. And again, that's what it is. Adding to the basketball lineup, adding an element that they don't have, that it would be nice if they did have. All right, I'm going to start with my first guy who frustrated the hell out of me, but nonetheless, here we are.
Get him out of the way.
Get him out. That's exactly what it is. Get him out of the way. I'm leading with Marquise Hollywood Brown, 2.6 yards per route run, which was a nice aspect to his season this past year. So, and a lot of the film I'm going to be showing here is from 2023. He was banged up with that shoulder injury in 2024, so not a huge sample size overall. But my favorite stat of his, 3.7 yards per route off of play action in 2024, which was 31st out of 504 total players. So I thought that was pretty good. But granted, sample size being a factor, his small amount of games skewed every filter for 2024 because he didn't have a lot of pieces there. 11 routes on play action in 2024, 7 targets, a negative 10.9% catch rate over expected, which is not great. No. And then 4.1 air yards per target. RPO is factored into this a bit as well in terms of how PFF was tracking RPOs versus play action. He was used a lot in those RPO bubbles. Get him the ball quick, let him eat up space, all that kind of stuff. But I'll let the film run here. And again, a lot of this is the 2023 tape for him. The speed is still present. I don't think he's the player that he was at Oklahoma or even with Baltimore, as you shake your head in agreement with me, but in a negative way, unfortunately. Yeah. He does have the speed to stretch the field and run past some defenders. He makes his turns and breaks without losing much speed. His small stature and his frame will hinder his contested catch ability and ability to play through contact. For a smaller guy, he's got longer legs, so there's not much wiggle, not much shake to his game. He's not going to kind of make you miss in a phone booth. Along with that, he will run some dudes off because of the threat of the speed, but he's got minimal hip sync. He's not this guy that's really getting bendy and getting deep into as he starts to throttle down and pop back out. I think he lacks deception in his routes, the breaks and the stems. He's more of a one gear type of route runner where it's, 100 miles an hour, and then he'll slow down a bit from time to time in his breaks, but not too much. And again, long speed to stretch the field, but I think he lacks sharpness and precision in his routes. And then he will struggle versus physicality. If you've got guys up against him in press, if they're going to try and soft shoe him, that's fine because he has the speed to still get past him a bit. But if you want to get a true press and get hands on him, and you can get hands on him, like Denzel Ward is a good example in 2023 where he just made his life hell by getting a good jam on him, and then he's got kind of nowhere to go, similar for his spots at the catch point as well. His numbers in Arizona, he was a bit of a victim of some unfortunately bad QB play from time to time, and they never really got a great chance to catch on in Kansas City. His spot track market value is $8 million from an average annual value standpoint. I don't think he gets that much. If he did, I am 1,000% out. But this is a name a lot of people have clamored for. He does offer some usefulness too in still being able to stretch the field. But it really is kind of that one trick, and it's somewhat of a diminished trick.
Yeah, it's like, all right, either he's running a go or he's running like a post or a deep over. So if you look at some of his numbers for over the last 2 years, 2023, 2024, he had a total of 715 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, 65 receptions over that span. And it's funny, if you look at, what coverages he was making a lot of that production on. Mm-hmm. So 17 receptions, 245 yards, and 2 touchdowns was versus cover 1. You said, remember, hey, the Bills see a lot of single high. Mm-hmm. So again, this is why you picked them. Mm-hmm. Cover 1, 245 yards, 2 touchdowns over the last year and a half, 2 years. And then the other one, the second, the most production, it came versus cover 3, 24 receptions, 284 yards. So it's funny, single high, guess what? If you see a lot of it, which the Bills do, Marquise Brown makes sense. And then, of course, there's all those rumors along the internet that, he's always wanted to play with Josh. I know a lot of the Bills fans are enamored with this guy. And in many ways, when you're talking about the Bills offense and the targets that fans believe the Bills should go after, I feel like Hollywood is the first guy they mention. And I can see why. But when we watched this film, I think I was more underwhelmed than anything. But again, in the framing and perspective of this show and the area that the Bills can improve on, I think he is a pretty good fit. He's just not what I expected or remembered of him years ago when he was coming into the league, and what he brought to the league obviously has changed a little bit here on the back end the last couple of years.
This rep right here against Cincinnati is the one that, like, I'm looking for the most. Okay, you have man coverage on the outside, and just Cam Taylor-Britt's a good athlete, good foot speed, good long speed as well, and you watch him just outside release, bang, and he just blows by him. Like, that is his value right there, and then he gets overthrown because that's what his year was in Arizona. But that just in and of itself is the value that he brings. And again, it's nice, but yeah, I've seen a lot of people throw his name out there. Man, they should go get Hollywood, or they should go get Hollywood. And I think a lot of the Hollywood that they're seeing in their mind when they say that is the Ravens Hollywood or the Oklahoma Hollywood, where there was a little more shake or a little more electricity to his game. And, yeah, like I mentioned, that $8 million average annual value is significant.
Yeah.
And I don't think he gets that. If it's anywhere near that, I am out. Like, no, thank you for that. But I really don't see him getting that after a bit of a down year in Arizona the past couple, and then he's hurt. And then when he comes back, it's still for an offense in Kansas City that needed explosion and needed his skill set. It seemed like granted, he was banged up, but it seemed like they found a way to have Worthy take over all of that. And then even Watson a little bit too, and it left Brown in the dust. I don't think he gets that much, but if he came anywhere near that, I am out. But
I agree. I think it'll be lower. There's no doubt. I think it'll be lower. And again, his role, if it's going to just be niche worthy, is it worth that? That's what you need to ask yourself. If the Bills have, two receivers on the field, is he going to be a top 2 receiver on the field for the Bills?
Bang.
And so again, these are things that are going to come up when it comes to everybody eats, right? And who knows how that plays out when it comes to Marquise Brown in the Bills offense.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Like, what are you doing? Are you trying to use him in 11 and then he's the single receiver on the backside? Because if you're going with 2 receivers on it, imagine him as one of the 2 receivers, and you're in a condensed look. Is he fitting up on duo? Exactly. Is he inserting into the C gap to pick up somebody? Like, it's not happening.
It'll be very limited, very much like Tutu in many ways, where if you have 2 receivers and you're showing, maybe you have 6 offensive linemen, you're showing that package, and you're going to run play action, that makes sense. But he's going to have to block on some of those or else you're creating tendencies. And so
exactly,
again, that niche and that role will be interesting if they were to pursue him to add to that wide receiver room. Another guy who played, and I thought he had a pretty good year, all things considered, especially with a rookie quarterback in Washington, was Dyami Brown?
Dyami Brown.
I'm terrible with names, but
I am too, so I'm not the best resource,
so
but I know him from seeing it Caroline all the time. Yeah, Dyami Brown.
I'm just like that dude, that guy, I thought he had a solid year, 44 receptions, 537 yards, only 2 touchdowns. But when you look at his EPA per target, especially for framing it from, play action standpoint, he was 4th overall on EPA per target on play action plays. Very good there. He had, what surprised me, 7 yards after catch per reception. That was in the Commanders offense. And just like you're seeing right there, he did a lot of that. But what surprised me is, yes, he's got the straight line explosive speed, but he actually initiated and relished contact when they threw these screens to him, or when he got a short pass and got to turn around and get upfield. I was surprised at how he brought his pads behind him on those kind of plays. Now, very much like Marquise Brown, he lacks that sharp, efficient cuts in his breaks. So he primarily depends on his straight line speed for separation. But again, you're talking about play action, you're talking about a vertical threat, even some manufactured touches, which we know the Bills love to do, whether it's with Shakir, Curtis Samuel, or in others. Like, I think they can have another guy like this that can get down the field, that can separate with speed, but again, also brings a little boom at the end of the plays like you see there.
And I think that's for me the big selling point with him. I liked him at Carolina. I liked him going to Washington back when it was like him and Dotson and McLaurin. And I was like, oh, they could have this cool trio wide receivers. And then Dotson got shipped out. I was like, okay, we'll see what happens for Brown. I like the combination of the size that he has. So 6 foot, around 200 pounds. I think he's listed at 195. but type of aspect. I like the speed and the verticality, but then also the gadgetry that you get from him. I like that he's someone, in just comparing him to Hollywood for this instance, you get the ball to Hollywood on an RPO or a quick little bubble or a screen guy.
Yep.
Yes, but then he falls forward. He moves the pile a bit. He's not easy to take down. And then you add that to the straight line speed and being able to threaten vertically a little bit. Okay, we're checking the numbers in the box.
Yeah.
It's affordable cost, it would seem. Yeah, I'm a fan of Dyami Brown.
Yeah, he was. It was interesting to watch his film because again, he's a guy that I thought after.
Oh, I feel like that's after.
After?
Maybe at the tail end. Now I'm going to look it up right now while you talk.
Yeah, just the North Carolina thing just threw me off, and I'm trying to think how far back that was. Either way, I was surprised to see how his game is developed. Because it's not something that I remember from him years ago in college where he was doing some of this stuff. And again, I thought this offense was pretty good overall when you're talking the Commanders' offense being operated by a rookie quarterback.
Yeah, Dyami Brown was 2 years after Mac,
Okay,
so
2
there was
years
a
after.
slight gap. Mac ended in 2016 at Carolina. Dyami started in 2018. But again, you have to have athleticism and some kind of juice physicality combination to be able to function in that like heavy RPO world that Kingsbury was running with Washington. So I like what he can do underneath, and the Bills do use some of those elements, but being able to push vertical, he's got some size, just that ability to kind of have multiple. And again, this isn't because I feel like we run into this every year because everybody's always like, oh, you think he's going to be some amazing, like all pro, this and that. He's got a bunch of different like boxes ticked, not elite in any one area, but he's average to above average in a multitude of receiver skill set pieces
all around
that the Bills could use. Yes. And that the Bills could need. And his ability to use that size and speed throughout his stems, throughout his routes, like you see that translate in addition to do all the underneath stuff that he did at Washington and could do with the Bills. So, and again, for being something around the price that he is, good.
1.9 mil is the price.
I
1.9 spot track, 1.9 mil. Again, 3rd round pick, 25 years old. You're not breaking the bank with him. I think he'll get more than that. Yeah, it's the wide receiver mark. I think that's a terrible number from spot track, but I don't think it'll be much more. But again, he's just a well-rounded guy. And if we're talking everyone eats, it's nice to have, if someone's injured, he can do a little bit of everything. He's more of a, I don't want to call him a Swiss Army knife because I don't think he's that kind of guy, but he's, like you said, he's good in a lot of different areas, not great or elite in any, but if you need him to carry, a few catches here or there in a game because there's injuries and stuff, he needs to step in, I think is a reliable target when it comes to, again, being overall a solid all-around wide receiver.
Yeah, if you've got an injury to, hopefully they bring back Mac Hollins, but if you've got an injury to Mac or Keon and you need somebody to kind of wear, the thumper type of wide receiver role, he could do it a bit. If you need him to push vertically, he can do that. If Shakir is out and you need him to wear the Shakir underneath RPO screen hat, he could do that. And getting that all in one kind of guy, again, adds value. And it's a nice piece to see. I like that aspect to his game. The next one that I'm going to bring up, who I like, I was still disappointed in a couple ways with this guy, but he's been mentioned a ton amongst Bills fans, but I liked him much more than Hollywood Brown. No disrespect to Hollywood, but Darius Slayton, wide receiver formerly of the New York Giants. My big thing with him, my one-liner for him, he's a vertical threat who flashes pieces of a more complete game, but he leaves you wanting more. Like you'll see things from him at time to time and you're like, oh, and then you see it again in a larger sample size and you're like, oh, but he's got these pieces that are intriguing to his game, which we'll talk about in a minute. But if we lead off with the play action piece, in 2024, he had a positive 0.66 EPA per target off play action, which was 16th for qualifying wide receivers and 21st overall when you add in other position groups as well. Yards per reception off of play action, 19.7, which was 13th for qualifying wide receivers and 14th overall. And then he also had 8 explosive plays out of play action, big factor of that vertical speed and that element that he has. Also, just overall, 14.7 yards per catch last year, which was 17th out of 152 qualifying players, and 13.4 air yards per target, which was 11th out of that same 152 qualifying group. Overall, good long speed, similar to Brown, both Browns we talked about, not much sharpness or suddenness to the movements in his stems. He will show it in his releases a little bit. And you're going to see it in some of the fields. So honestly, the corners blind spots and run them off in zone, or he could threaten them vertically and get this cornerback to open like he does against Cam Taylor Britt right
See
there.
that separation. Yeah.
Yep. And then throttle down. He's got good hip sync. He's got that flexibility. He can get in and pop back out of his breaks. The long speed shows when he's able to get the ball out of the move or get the ball on the move. He's also able to run away from defenders in man coverage or on deep overs or drags. You see that happen. He's able to work versus press, particularly soft shoe. He had the 20 most reps against press in 2024. He's not a ball winner, doesn't maximize his catch radius or win at the catch point, which is a shame given his measurables, which I'm going to read here. For arm length, 87th for hand size, and then 93rd percentile for vertical jump, 97 for broad. So a good athlete with good length and size, but doesn't necessarily play to it. 10.7% career.
So for as productive and consistently productive he's been, there is that variance to his game where, there are some ugly drops, and a lot of the time there's some good separation, and he has those concentration issues or what. He just drops a lot of balls, man. And that is disappointing because, like you said, there is some pretty good separation. And again, to go with the size of him, he's a decent sized wide receiver.
Yeah.
It's kind of disappointing to have that many drops in wide open situations.
Yes. And I think that's for me is the kind of the why I ended my one liner with like the guy who shows this. You see some of what he can do in terms of a complete guy,
right?
And then you see the size and the package that it comes in, and you're like, okay, and he just doesn't maximize and capitalize on it. Now, could the Bills be the team that taps into that more complete game? Potentially. The speed alone is kind of worth, the ability to kind of take the top off the defense and what he adds overall. His average annual value per spot track as of right now,
it's up there.
I find it very high. His average annual value is $15.8 million. He's put into the same conversation as Michael Pittman, Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins, and Calvin Ridley. I don't see him getting that deal. I do think he could flirt somewhere around double digits, just given the speed and some team maybe believing that they can be the ones to kind of tap into more of those flashes and make it more consistent. But he does have an intriguing skill set despite the drops and some of the kind of uglier aspects of his game in terms of consistency.
Yeah, I think if you pair him with Josh Allen, will there be some drops? Absolutely. But I think his production goes through the roof. Like, keep that in mind. Obviously, he's a guy that played with the New York Giants. So there's been QB after QB issues there. There's been scheme and coaching changes and issues. And so he's gone through all of that. And yeah, I agree. I think that number for him, AAV wise, is a little high. But I do think that he could blow up with a quarterback like Josh Allen, even with the variance to the catch or no catch in his game. I think he would have a really good few years with Josh Allen as his quarterback. So overall, when it comes to some of the speed guys, the vertical guys, man cover, wide receivers, those were a few that we kind of pinpointed. Again, time constraints, money constraints. But I wanted to get a couple other guys in the film room with some film and talk about that are more like overall good producers in the league, refined players that could add to the Bills offense. Hypothetically, if the Bills were to move away from, say, a Mac Hollins, who's a guy that could step in, the production wouldn't drop off. Maybe there's a few different roles that he's going to bring that maybe Mac doesn't have, but just all around good guys to have in the wide receiver room when it comes to on and off the field. And the first guy is someone that I think we've talked about the last few years, right? Demarcus Robinson. Again, we talked about covering the Rams.
We did it since his last year in Kansas City. He's been on the show like 2 or 3 years in a row.
He just keeps producing. I mean, you keep doing that, we're going to give you kudos. I mean, last year he only had 35 receptions, but he had 602 yards and 7 touchdowns. And so in the red zone, they were going to him with some really nice scheme and production when it comes to that. But for him, he's just refined. He's a refined route runner, shows solid route execution with excellent body control, especially on those like digs and over routes. And it's just something like just continuously pops on film. He's good at finding the space or voids, end zone coverages, and creating that separation between the two defenders and that gray area between the two defenders. Yes, he is aging. He's on the tail end of his career, but he's just so I always say a wily vet. Like
Mhm.
he's seen it all and done it all. And he just seems like a professional. He's a professional. I think both these guys that we're going to talk about next are just professional. Now, he is limited a little somewhat if we're talking like vertically and stretching the field. He's not known as like a burner, but he relies on the precision and the scheme in many ways rather than his explosive speed. Now, if we whittle it down to play action, for him, under play action circumstances, his EPA per target was 0.98. That was 5th overall last year.
Oof.
So very good on play action. Obviously, the Rams, right? A very good scheme there. Yards per reception on play action, 20.5. That was 12th overall. And then explosive plays per target under play action, 42.1%, 8th overall. Overall, he's just a good, solid wide receiver who, again, if you're adding to the room and Mac isn't back, Amari Cooper isn't back, he's a guy that you bring in that is a technician. He's a pro. And I think the younger guys will respect him because, again, he's been in a lot of different offenses and he's produced in a lot of different offenses.
He's, I don't want to say a big want for me, but I would really, really like him to be incorporated into this wide receiver room. And I know it's not necessarily what we've been pushing. Like, again, he's not the huge vertical threat. He's not the juice guy, but just the low red zone ability alone. You've seen several of these plays, the one against Philly, against the Saints, against the Packers, where he wins on that, he's lined up on the right side of the formation and he stabs inside with that left foot before he hits that little flat route or that arrow route. And he just separates in an instant for those touchdowns underneath. It's so beautiful. And his precision, this is a great catch too. In the playoffs, big time moment, goes up, gets it, rips it away. I just think he's a guy that he's missing the speed, but you get some size, you get some blocking ability, you get some athleticism, you get some contested catch ability and ball winning ability and physicality, but it's the precision and what he does overall in terms of the precision with his routes, his stems, his releases, knowing where to find space in zone. He's somebody that I think rounds out your room more when you've already got like your top guys established. Again, the Rams are a good example. You've got Puka Nacua, you've got Cooper Kupp, Demarcus Robinson's your third. That's a really sweet wide receiver room.
Yeah.
So I think, he'd have to wear obviously a different type of hat if he's with the Bills, but somebody who fits into their scheme and then also adds a little bit. I think despite not having all the juice in the world, he is someone who can separate because he's got precision in his route running and can win with his releases, in his stem, or on the break. And that's part of why I advocate for him because, we talk about separation, and as you know, and we talk about here all the time, separation doesn't just mean speed. It doesn't mean just running away from guys. You can separate by being a good route runner and being precision and precise in your movements. And that's what he is. And putting it into that package with everything else that he does and the anticipated cost, I really, really, really like Demarcus Robinson. But then again, we've liked him for like 3 years in a row.
I know. He's one of those players that over the years, again, continuously produces, and we just keep coming back to him because he just becomes a free agent. It kind of reminds me of like Brandon Cooks. He's played with like several different teams.
Nice.
And who he is a free agent too, and he just produces and he keeps doing what he does. I feel like Demarcus Robinson has kind of hit that stride. Now he is 30 years old. As of today, his AAV per spot track is $3 million. So again, he's going to be a low end, roster or contract type guy. But I think his value again could be more to the Bills offense, to the Bills wide receiver room. Just another solid addition that we believe would be a nice fit in the Bills offense.
Yeah, and you had some, a little bit of the pedigree, playing with the Chiefs for 5 seasons, playing with the Rams for a couple. You played for Baltimore in 2022 and been around successful quarterbacks, successful offenses. He's got playoff experience. He's got experience in high leverage moments and situations against good teams and against good competition. I think he, like you said, the professionalism, I think he gives you a really good mind and presence in the room, just as a player and as a person off the field, but then what he adds on the field is a really nice aspect.
All right, moving on to one of the last guys we're going to talk about. Well, at least show film on. That is Josh Palmer here. He's a guy that when I started looking at advanced metrics, I'm like, hold on, really?
Yep.
And then I went and looked at the film, like, okay, maybe the context isn't what it seems. If we're talking pros, if we're talking like technicians and just knows what he's doing, and he's doing it against very good competition like Patrick Surtain right there, it's Josh Palmer, for the Chargers. He's very reliable, a veteran, consistently produces inside and outside the numbers. But his route running for a guy his size, and really that's not really talked about. Like some of these plays right here, he makes all the routes look the same. And usually it's from that condensed split, the nasty tight split right here, kind of giving him the inside or out, two-way go. But you see he adds that little sauce. I said he adds that little sauce in his routes that differentiate running an in route versus an out route, and it creates separation. His film was so much fun, dude. I became infatuated with his film so much. I started watching 2023 film just because he just made all these routes look the same. And so it's one thing to watch it from our perspective, the all 22. I can only imagine how difficult a cover he is from the cornerback position.
I watched like 4 to 6 games of the Chargers this year just because of Ladd McConkey and then them being a bigger, heavier type of offense, and wanted to see what Harbaugh and Roman were doing throughout the year. And Palmer just flashed like he's got that sauce that you mentioned. Like McConkey has that kind of sauce at the top of his route and how he gets in and out and what he makes things look like. Palmer has been a guy since he's been with the Chargers, has always been like the forgotten guy. It was all Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. And then Palmer was just there, just making plays, and Keenan Allen would get hurt. Yep. And Keenan would get hurt. Williams would get hurt. And Palmer would just find a way to pick up the slack. And I like everything that you mentioned about him, just like the presence, how he runs his routes. Again, I am a fan of adding someone in the room who is more of a technician when it comes to their route running and their stem work. I think it's good for the room, but also just good for the offense, because you've got Shakir, but you don't really have Samuel's not a route running technician. Keon Coleman is not that as well. And even if you bring back Matt Collins, he is not that. Right. You have that type of element in your room when you add somebody like Palmer because of what he got. And then even just from the size, right? Being over 6 feet, around 210 pounds. He's a bigger body dude, but he still has that, again, that professional approach to how he wins on the field. And again, all within the backdrop of potential cost and what it'll be and yada, yada. And then even, talk about a guy who's used to being able to handle fastballs. Herbert has a cannon. Allen has a cannon. You talk about, okay, cool. Like, we know that he's got no problem catching heat a little bit there. I like that type of guy rounding out the room. It would be nice if they had a true one already, but this is a nice element that still helps the room, elevates the room, rounds the room out with his skill set.
Yeah, and it's not gonna cost a ton to bring him in. Market value on him per spot track is 4.3 million AAV. I think he would add just that professionalism, that route running, that deception in his route running and routes. Yeah. And he's also very good over the middle in the intermediate area. So 10 to 19 yards. Last year, 17 receptions on 25 targets for 295 yards, a 0.7 EPA per target, and 17 first downs just in that 10 to 19 yard range over the middle of the field. Now, most of these targets that we talked about tonight were outside the number type guys, those vertical routes, those deep posts, those deep overs running away from man coverage. I think Palmer does a little bit of everything. You can tighten his split to give him that two-way go so he can, use that, become that snake oil salesman, like that type of player. Like, he's so good in that area. But aside from him, are there other names that you would think that would look good in the Bills offense? And everyone listening and watching, be sure to throw your targets in there as well. Again, keep it logical, keep it rational. I know it's very hard to do, but that's what we kind of did tonight with some of the targets that we threw out there when we were doing our research. If you have some other names that you want us to take a look at, let us know, and we can break it down on social media or even in the Discord channel. So, Ant, I'll throw it to you, man. Is there anyone else that's out there you're like, actually, this guy would look good in the Bills offense as well?
Stephon Diggs. I'm like not even half kidding. Like, I would welcome him back.
You like Duck?
That's literally like Diggs, and then I hit leave studio and I shut down my computer so no one can yell at me. The separation ability, that'd be great. But no, in a more serious fashion, from the top end, I mean, again, cost is going to be the biggest one. The only guy that I can see towards the top end that intrigues me in any way, and it's not necessarily an exact fit, I keep coming back to Chris Godwin because of his blocking ability and what he can do as a power slot and a condensed formation guy. And coming off of that horrible injury, I don't know, maybe he signs like a 1-year, $5 million deal. I don't know how healthy he would be. I don't think it works for a multitude of reasons, but he towards the top of the list guys is the one that kind of intrigues me, but I don't find it very realistic. The only other name really, Justin Watson, the receiver from the Chiefs, who, just a bit of a, some size there at 6'2", 215 pounds, but runs in the 4.4s. He was their vertical guy. His size for years, I kept thinking he was a tight end.
I literally was going to say that. I was like, I could have swore for like 3 years he was a tight end, especially because they aligned him in a lot of those like spots. And so I was like, I swore he was a tight end. He's actually a receiver? And then I looked, I'm like, oh yeah, he's 29 years old. He's kind of on the older end, but I'm like, I could have swore he was a tight end, not even a receiver.
What would get me is it'd be like Kelsey, Gray, Bell, who are all tight ends, and then Watson. And I'd be watching that, and it was like literally a couple years ago, I was like, they're out there running 4 tight ends. Like, what does that look like, from the data?
White?
Right? Like, what is happening? And then they didn't have any like 4 tight end reps. And I was like, but Watson's, and so I went and I was like, oh, he's a wide receiver. But just another guy who I think he's got some size. He does block well. He does work in those tighter alignments and condensed looks closer to the formation. But he's got some speed to get deep. He's a good ball tracker. He's got some good hands, especially down the field. Again, I think he's going to be cost effective, good blocker, good size, and has that speed and vertical stretch element. He's somebody who I think realistically could be attained given the cost and then what he brings.
I'd say the guy I would add, and I kind of just added him today, but we had notes on him as well from last year, and that's Noah Brown from the Commanders.
Dude, I was going to do it. I literally was going to do that, but I didn't want to sell out and be like, have people be like, you guys did Demarcus Robinson and Noah Brown last year. You're going to do it. Yeah, he was on my wish list. I would welcome him this year.
6'2", 220 plus pounds. He had
went to Washington too.
He went to the Commanders. That offense was very everybody eats as well. If you looked at it top to bottom, 35 receptions, 453 yards, only 1 touchdown, but a solid 1.63 yards per route run. Physical brand of football. Doesn't let the defenders lean or get into him and disrupt his plan. He was 10th in vertical route win percentage at 17.9%.
He's a good route runner and a physical blocker on top of it too. Yeah.
Yes, tough route runner, very physical, snatches the ball away from his body. We talked about him last year, but he's definitely a guy that, again, if you frame it from the perspective of, hey, Mac maybe isn't back and maybe he earned a little pay bump and they don't pay him, maybe Noah Brown's a guy that comes over now and, again, brings a different brand of football, but is, again, a veteran that can be added to the room. Very QB friendly as well. It works, through and around defenders to find the soft spots in zone. And one of those guys that just each year just still is getting 400 or 500 yards. Like, he just does it. I think he was down this year when it comes to the yards after catch per reception. This year it was at 2.4 yak per reception. Last year it was 6.8. That was one of the things we were trying to get on that yak train, right? We were trying to add that to the offense. And so he was one of those guys that was damn near 7 yards after catch per reception last year. But this year was 2.4. But again, he was using a different way. He was more vertical this year as opposed to, prior years. So he's just a guy that I was like, you know what? I have to look at him again. When I looked at him and I looked at the Commanders offense, I was like, okay, he could eat. Yeah. He could eat in the Bills offense as well.
I went back. I pulled up my tweet from my scouting stuff from him last year. So his 2023 season, he was 6th in yards per target, 4th in yards per catch, 12th in first down percentage, 17th in rating when targeted, 19th in average depth of catch, 20th in EPA per target, 31st in yards per route run. And some of my player notes: attacks leverage and sells routes with good body language, toughness after the catch, wins consistently downfield on sits, hooks, overs, posts, and corners. He transitions well from receiver to runner, especially with physicality, and he can separate with physicality in his stem or in his breaks. Yeah, I am a big fan of Mr. Noah Brown.
And let me pull up real quick before we transition his spot track. Again, 29 years old, 1.5 million. So if you're talking a guy that's, wide receiver 4 or 5, or like he's a guy that could round out your wide receiver room and, again, do a little bit of everything and honestly bring some of that physical brand of football that we want to see from Keon Coleman, who we, kind of kicked off the show with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Brown is another guy. Obviously, all the guys we mentioned in this episode, but these guys who tick one box or a multitude of boxes also fit within the cost. I know for some that's probably not. I know a lot of fans we want T. Higgins.
T. Higgins,
or and it's like, why come you guys didn't do T. Higgins? And just like go with that. And okay, well, that's not necessarily the most realistic thing. I say that, and then they'll figure out a deal for T. Higgins on like the Monday of free agency and be like, oh, we should have done T. Higgins. But that would be great if they could win, fit in a true number one, if they could fit in that true X, or, they have a number one with the speed and presence and route running and all these things. But again, as we've done these past several years, that costs more. They're not a team that's really ready to break the bank in a multitude of ways. So they have to be selective with how they spend. And with the areas they have to improve on the defensive side of the ball, it makes more sense to kind of allocate some funds there because they have a multitude of spots they need to upgrade and address.
Yeah. And I know we covered primarily wide receiver in this episode, especially if we're talking the offensive side ball, but we believe in most cases when it comes to offensive line, the tight end room, and even the running back room to a certain extent, we believe they're pretty set, especially if we're talking short term over the next year or so, but especially long term. But if there is one area real quick we can touch upon, it's a Ty Johnson thing. It's that running back 3. It's that third down option. I think he's a guy that's a position or role that we have analyzed, we have researched and looked at different options. But when you look at the options on the free agent market, when it comes to running back, when it comes to that role and niche, he's one of the best. Mm-hmm. He is one of the best, especially if you're talking about not just the blocking element, but also the receiving element. And again, being in the offense and knowing the offense. One guy I looked at today, Javonte Williams, obviously a very good blocker. He blocked the second most pass block reps last year for a running back. I think he's great at it. I think he's good when you're talking from the shoulders up and executing it physically. He's always been a really good pass blocker, but I think he's going to probably command more than Ty Johnson. And so when you're talking, leaking out, you talked about when we broke down the Bills free agents, he's very good. Ty Johnson's very good at recognizing, okay, they don't need me. I can get out and become an option and make big plays. So for that position, if there's one role or position that, we looked at, but we didn't want to spend a lot of time on, it was probably that third running back role occupied the past year by Ty Johnson.
Yeah. And he's somebody who, again, market values, per spot tracker over the cap aren't necessarily, the Bible, but Ty Johnson last year at a $1.3 million contract, his average annual value as of right now on his market value is calculated at 2.7. So 1.4 million higher than the deal he signed last year. He potentially made himself some money playing with the Bills. He made some big splash plays. He was very QB friendly as a pass protector and as a route runner, like you talked about. And like we've analyzed so much on this show, I want him back. I hope/think he will be, but exactly to your point, like if he doesn't, that's the type of role you're starting to look at, because your 1 and 2 are pretty much set with Cook and Davis. And the only way that changes is if they really are that far apart with James Cook and they don't see any way to rectify it. And I just think that's very extreme, leading to the point where, okay, we're going to trade him now and capitalize on the year that he had. And if that happens, then maybe you're looking at, the other names on the market, but it just looks exactly to your point. Like the running back room is pretty set aside from the Ty Johnson piece. The O-line is set, even going all the way to like the 6th offensive lineman that they use. The tight end room is pretty set, unless you want to advocate for Morris coming back. But the top 2 are set, we think. I don't want to say that. And then tomorrow it's like Bills trade Dalton Kincaid. So those spots are pretty much set, which is why we didn't spend, too much time diving into those.
Right. And again, the value for the impact that Ty Johnson made, it's just night or day. And again, Javonte Williams, as good as a blocker he is, and running back overall as he is, Spot Track has him at 6.9 mil. Will he get that? I don't know. But he, in my opinion, would probably get more than Ty Johnson, because he's been a full-time back, albeit he had some injuries, but he's a solid back. It just adding some perspective to that. And I think in the end, as this episode, kind of winds down, the Bills offense is pretty solid.
Yes.
And so we talked about several ways to improve it, and we threw some targets out there that we believe fit the offense and would help in those areas. But obviously, they can not just address this in free agency. They can do it in the draft, and I think they will. I think they will do both areas. That's what Brandon Beane does. He wants to lock in guys so that there aren't holes in this offense or in this defense going into the season, going into the draft. And so, these are some guys that could help round out the Bills offense, but just because free agency is here doesn't mean that they're not going to address it in the draft as well.
Yeah, and like you said, we've seen this formula kind of for years. They try to plug or patch up as many holes as they can going into the draft so their hand is enforced, and then they go BPA, or they maybe have one need that's bigger than the others. But yeah, the defense needs some love and some care this offseason, just from a bodies perspective, but especially from a schematic tweak or adjustment perspective, like we've been outlining here on this show. And when you look at how free agency stacks up, how the draft stacks up, there are a multitude of ways and avenues in which this defense can get better and this offense can add some elements to the wide receiver room. Again, whether it's in free agency, whether it's in the draft, or maybe we see something crazy happen offensively, and then we're thinking of another position that becomes higher up on the board. But this was a really good unit last year. Joe Brady's coming back. Pretty much everybody that was like a starter or significant snap person last year, significant snap eater last year is back. We'd like to see Mac Hollins come back. But other than that, this offense really is pretty set. It's just tweaking and adding some things to kind of put them over the top and also fix the defense at the same time. Eric, any final thoughts or parting words for the people before we let them go?
Like I said earlier, if you have other options and ideas, please share them in the comment section, in the chat room, in the show. We appreciate everyone tuning into this. Over the years, we've had a lot of great feedback for this show, and we love it, but we will admit it's a lot of work, guys.
Yeah,
it's a lot of work. So for the 6 or 7 or 8 guys that we discuss on the show, whether it's with film or just, talking about them, we watch twice as many of those guys. And when you looked at like the advanced metrics, it was probably even more of that. And so it's hours upon hours of work. And
there's so whittling down just to get to these guys. There's so much wading through that we have to do.
Yes. And so we appreciate you guys tuning in, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify, our iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to the podcast. Please share, please hit that like button, leave us a comment, when it comes to not just on YouTube, but also in your podcast platforms as well, because that goes a long way, as Anthony says, to track and trend for the show. We're trying to reach another audience or another side of the audience when it comes to the audio side and podcast format. So any way you guys can help us, share our work, talk about our work, we appreciate it. We appreciate you guys tuning in live tonight as well. And it was a fun episode, and we're going to kind of wrap things up next week when it comes to free agency. Maybe even talk about some of our top, 8 to 10 guys when it comes to free agency, and then kind of put a bow on free agency period before the fun actually begins and they start spending that money.
Yeah, the fun and the madness, and then how that continues all the way through the draft for, what March and April will be. And whatever form or fashion your support comes in, we are extremely thankful for it, extremely grateful for it. We greatly appreciate it. Whether you are a watcher, listener, one of our insiders, or in the Discord channel, or if you're just a person who said a kind word about us sometime to somebody who's a Bills fan or a football fan, any and every ounce of support is greatly appreciated and tremendously, we're very thankful for that. So please continue to do that if you are one of those supporters. If not, become a supporter in some form or fashion. That would be really great. We appreciate you folks. And again, on those podcasting apps or platforms, ratings, reviews, subscriptions, all that kind of stuff goes a long way towards helping us. Turn on notifications for the Film Room playlist here on the YouTube channel. Subscribe to the Cover One channel as a whole. We have you covered pretty much every single day of the week with various levels of Bills content. And if you have any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns for us, something that you want to see, something that you had as a follow-up question, anything and everything that you want, feel free to leave it in the comments here on YouTube or get at us on Twitter. Eric is running that Cover One handle at Cover One. That's covering the number 1. You got his individual handle at Eric J. Turner. I'm on Twitter at pro__ant. So anything you got, questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, feedback, whatever have you, please let us know and we will get after it and wrap
also
things up. Yeah.
Let me add this, Ant. Sure. The Film Room also has its own X handle as well. It's at Cover One, the number 1 Film Room. So find us on there as well. We just started posting mainly film, of course.
Yeah.
Obviously. And then advanced metrics, just like the show every single week. So there's not going to be a lot of fluff there. It's going to be a lot of our evaluations about scheme, players, breakdowns, press conference, talk, and again, a lot of metrics to support all of that. So everything you get in a show every single week, we're going to have it at the Cover One Film Room handle on X.
Yeah, definitely promoting pieces from the show. We're kind of tying some things in, doing some foreshadowing and some, breadcrumbs and putting things together for the content as a whole. So yeah, give that a follow. Check us out. Again, anything you need from us, let us know. We greatly appreciate you folks. Many thanks to Joe DeRosa, our man behind the scenes, for doing some of the help in the production. So many thanks to him. Any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, get at us. We hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. We'll see you next Wednesday for another edition of the Cover One Film Room. But until then, I'm Anthony Prohaska. That's Eric Turner. Godspeed. And as always, go Bills.